From 2014 had an article about the top small towns in America, and it put Butler as number 7. And I say, you Nashville people think you're so important, but you didn't make the list. You know, Butler is on this list. So we moved here in 2010. And at the time, my kids were, I guess, 2, 4, 6, and 8. And they are now 16 to 22. So we've been here a good long while. I always joke that I came to Butler kind of kicking and screaming. And the reason is, when I left Northern Virginia, which I liked it okay, I lived in Savannah, Georgia. That's a beautiful place. Has anyone been to Savannah, Georgia? Yeah. Did you like it?
Sure.
It was probably the dreamiest year of my life in Savannah. I loved it there, and I'll get back to that later. And then I lived in Charlottesville, Virginia. Has anyone seen that cute town? And then I lived in Franklin, Tennessee. So I lived in all these adorable, cute places. And the first time I saw Butler downtown, about half the stores were boarded up. And I thought, I don't really want to live here. And I actually told my husband, we're not going to live in Butler. We were trying to buy a house somewhere else, but we ended up getting a great house in Butler, which also is in my story. So the chapter 1 picture or sketch is actually a sketch of my home in Butler. And I don't know if I can show it to you. Yeah. So it's a very typical Butler home. You know, the front of it was built in 1912, and it looks just like about, I'd say, 40% of all the other houses in Butler. But the reason it was such a good deal for us is that some guy added on a whole bunch in the back. So my 4 homeschool kids had a lot of room to play, and it became just the perfect house for us. But the house was built in 1912.
What street's it?
Whitestown Road. Yeah. And we've had, you know, the typical things where the metal bathtub or the wrought iron bathtub almost broke through the ceiling and crashed into the floor. And there's mysterious cisterns in the yard that when my husband was trying to put a fence post in, he found this old cistern. So just typical things you explore and discover in an old house. But I found it very inspiring as I was beginning to write this book, to write what I knew. And there are a lot of autobiographical features about my house in the book. So we buy this house in Butler, and I said to someone, somebody should write a book that's set in Butler. Well, the reason I said that is because when I lived in Savannah, Georgia, it was 1994, and a man named John Barrent had just written a book. Oh, you got it up? Had just written a book that was set in Savannah, and it turned into a movie. It was called Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. Did anyone ever read this book? It has some pretty dark, off-color parts to it. Sometimes I don't want to admit that I read it. But what was amazing was that that book transformed Savannah. So in 94, Broughton Street was completely boarded up because the big mall in the 70s had stolen all of the stores. So downtown Savannah, other than River Street, was pretty boarded up and ugly. But by the time that book became a movie in 1996, by 97, I went back to visit. By 98, the whole town was alive. And if you go now, they say for 30 years they capitalized off of what this book did for Savannah. So I didn't think I would be the one to write the book. I would tell people, someone should write a book about Butler. But you know, sometimes the way the Lord works is when you say it out loud enough, he finally says, you need to listen to yourself. So 2 years ago, in the summer of 2023, we had a foreign exchange student in our house. Now, I was excited that this was going to be the greatest thing. We'd get to know her and help her and bless her. But instead, there was all this tension in our home. And I don't know if you've ever had someone living in your house that brought a lot of stress to you, but it turns out this girl was, I think, a classic narcissist. The whole world just revolved around her, and nothing we could do would please this girl. But I didn't know that. I'd never been around a narcissist. But what happened to me is every night at 2 a.m, I'd wake up and I couldn't sleep. And I would try to figure out why was there this tension in my house. And I would start to write. And I began to write this book. And if you get to read my book, has anyone here read it yet? Okay. If you choose to read my book, you will find out that the main character has a lot of narcissism. And I had never met a narcissist. I didn't know I was living with a narcissist. But the main quality is really they choose to feel like everything is about them. The world revolves around them. You can't possibly ever please them. And I began to write about what I was experiencing in this main character. So his name is Adam. Let me show you my slides since our great helper got these up here. So I wrote the book to try to make a difference. And I told you about my Savannah story. You know, I'm not a politician, although ironically, I'm on the school board. I never saw that happening, but I'm on the school board. But I'm not someone who has any great influence in Butler. I just homeschooled my kids and, want to make a difference in my community. But I see a book as something that might be able to go beyond what I could do myself. I wanted to instill some local pride. Now, you guys are in Cecelia, and I think Cecelia has done a great job of making people love their community. It's beautiful, it's active, it's fun, right? But there's some people in Butler who love Butler and others that want to get out. And so I wanted to highlight the many great things about Butler and Butler history. I wanted to help increase tourism and interest in Butler. And I wanted to, hopefully that would spring over to open some new businesses and improve the economy at Butler. And possibly maybe we can make a movie that's set in Butler and is about Butler. I found out there's been about 7 movies filmed in Butler, but none of them have been about Butler. And then there was a movie being filmed right down the street a few weeks ago. Did you all know that in Harmony, they started filming a movie about Hershey just a couple weeks ago? So that's neat. But again, it's not about Butler. And then finally, I love the theme of redemption. And I'll get to that a little bit more later, but I wanted to write a story that dealt with redemption and that being a theme. So this is just some of the things I used to write the book. If you were interested in writing, I always thought you had to, I don't know how people did it with typewriters, without computers. I don't know how they do that, because the way I was writing, I would have a thought and I would need to capture and save that thought. And then a few weeks later, I'd be like, oh, I have that saved in this thing called a Google Doc, and I could pull it back in, and all these strands in my brain that were working overtime. Have y'all met Bill May or heard of Bill May? Yeah, we hear. Isn't coming tomorrow? You'll have to say it's Cecelia. He was helpful in my book. I went to 3 of his talks, and you'll enjoy Bill May. But he has so much ancestral history here that a lot of the things he knows are not in any books, and you can't find them online. They're all in his head. So I asked him permission to use a few things that he had shared that I couldn't find anywhere else. For example, he shared in one of his talks that there was once a person in Butler named Stella Moser who riveted a button to her finger working at an overall shop. Now that's a weird little thing to know, but I just started thinking about poor Stella with her messed up finger, and I created a character in my book that always wore her gloves and was a little bit silly and kind of clumsy, and I just worked Stella into my story. So things like that. You'll enjoy Bill. I tried to write the kind of book that I like to read, which I like all literature. I was an English major and I enjoy reading. But now when I've been busy with my family and kids, I like to read books that give some description and a lot of action. I like Mark Twain, but after 4 pages of description, you're like, get to the story. So I tried to write what I like to read, and that includes the sketches. So if you flip through the book, you'll see that every chapter has a sketch in it, because I think it's just a helpful anchor to help people who are more visual connect to the story as well. So my sister-in-law actually did those sketches for me. She is a very talented artist. So I used 3 books primarily, and I don't really like to read a history book, ironically, cover to cover. I like to kind of dig through them. But this is a great history book available at the Butler Historical Society. Has anyone seen that book before? It has a lot of great photographs. It's a great big book. Polly Shaw, have y'all met her? Is she coming here soon?
Very.
Oh, good. Yeah, Polly, I've only met her once, but she has written this great book about Marine State Park. And so that helped me a lot because I tried to highlight in my book places like Lake Arthur and Preston Park so that people who don't live here would say, I want to see that. I want to come to Butler and I want to see that. And people who do live here would get a better understanding of what it took to develop these beautiful places. And then David Todd, I've never met him, but he wrote the only book, I think, about Armco. And it has a lot of great photographs as well in it. So I used those books. I used a lot of internet research and just dug and dug. It's amazing what you can find out when you are awake from 2 to 5 in the morning for 6 months. This is a sketch. Can anyone recognize that building? Yeah.
Your book?
No, I have that one in my book too. This is a sketch from the, not from the Hanson Avenue side, but from down below the Pullman Standard building. The big Pullman building near Armco Bank in Butler.
Your office?
Yeah, the big office building. So when I moved to town, I noticed that building right away. When you drive up Raleigh 8 coming from the turnpike, and you all say, what is that building? And year after year, this building had a for sale sign in front of it. It says 48,000 square feet, which was more than I needed, so we weren't going to buy it. But I did call the realtor. And fortunately, she didn't ask me why I wanted to see the building. But she took my family through this building back in 2014. Just because I don't like to see empty buildings. And I'm always curious, what was this empty building? So, 9 years before I started on this book, I went inside this building. And my dad, who died almost 9 years ago, he used to joke. He'd say, someday we're going to buy that building. And so part of my redemption story has to do with the Pullman story and the Pullman building. Okay, another sketch I have is this. Everyone knows that. That has a lot to do with Butler. What is that? Your old Bantam reconnaissance car or Jeep. This book that you've been holding today kind of has a flashback mechanism that ends in 1929. So I only gave like a paragraph to the Jeep. But do you know what happens when God starts to work in you? Sometimes I thought I was done. I wrote a book. I did it, Lord, I'm done. 2 months later, I'm lying in bed and God starts to give me a whole nother story that's focused on the period up to 1946 about the development of the Jeep. So I'm kind of in the trenches. I finished the first draft and I'm very excited about the second book, which continues the story. Didn't plan it, but I will give you a preview of what happened. I had been telling people for 6 months, I'm writing a book to bring positive attention to Butler. And then July 13th happened. And suddenly, Butler was on the front of every newspaper in the world. And I said, God, now I think I know why you wanted me to do this book, to kind of balance out maybe some of what this bad, awful, terrible tragedy of Trump getting shot in our beautiful town. So I put the book out there, and a few months later, that wasn't enough. The next story starts with that day. And it was really interesting to write because I was writing a fictional story grounded in real things about Butler as they were happening in real time. So his return in October, Mark Phobel getting out of the Russian prison, the discovery of a time capsule in our middle school, like all these things are happening as I'm writing a book set in that time period. So that was really fascinating. But that is the second book that will hopefully be near next year. The Penn Theater. So how many of you ever went to the movies in the Penn Theater? Yeah? Again, you moved to Butler and the theater is boarded up. And I'm like, what is a Main Street without a theater? I mean, you guys here have the Strand. It's active. I think of a theater as like the heart of a Main Street. And it was boarded up all of these years that I've lived here. One day I was listening to a radio show and heard Brian and Marina Frenchek were opening up the Penn Theater. This was July of 2023. And that week is when I started writing my book. Now, I'm also kind of a silly person, so I found a realtor, and I asked her about Brian and Marina Frenchek. Brian was raised in Butler, but he moved to Houston. His wife, Marina, was raised in Argentina, I believe, and they mostly live in Houston. But every time he would bring his wife to Butler, she would say, someone needs to open this theater. And I guess they have some money because they eventually bought it and now it's opened. But in that window, I found a realtor who gave me Brian's phone number. And I called this man. I didn't know what I was going to say. And he answered the phone. And his lovely wife, Marina, is in the background saying, why do you answer phones for people you don't know? Anyway, I told him, I said, I have this desire to write a book. I want to help Butler. I'm excited about what you're doing. And so we have gotten together. And the whole time that he was fixing that, I was excited and sharing my progress. So I feel like I think there's a renaissance that's happening in Butler. I believe it's coming, where things that were long dead and shut and forgotten and boarded and bad are going to come to life. And I believe the Penn Theater was a big first step for that. It gave me the timeline to say, we need to do this now. On the bottom left or left there, does anyone recognize that building? Over here?
Preston Park.
Yes. That is Frank and Jane Preston's laboratory in Preston Park. I live right across the street from Preston Park. In fact, we don't go in the main way, so even when it was shut down during COVID or after ice storms, we still sneak in there and walk our dogs. So I feel like this is my kind of home away from home in Preston Park. In fact, it was a personal gift to me. Our house is on a very busy road. Whitestown Road is very, very busy. And when we bought this house and realized that our 4 kids had nothing but a busy road, I said, Lord, that doesn't work for me. I want to take my homeschool kids on walks. And, I found out a year before was when the park opened up and we can literally walk across the street. For a while, we had to sneak through an old gate, but then they tore the gate down. So it kind of became our backyard. Not only did I do a lot of research on Frank Preston, I volunteered to try to help be a tour guide for the park, but I discovered one very wonderful thing, which was that Frank Preston and Jane Preston didn't have any kids. So I put him in my book as a character, and I gave him a wonderful role in my book because no kids or grandkids can come after me. But Preston was a fascinating man that came over from England. He became a world-renowned glass scientist. And maybe some of you know, did any of you actually know him, meet him? My neighbor used to work over there, so he knew him. And I just used my imagination to imagine him and Jane and their personalities as they, influenced not only Butler, but the whole world. I talk about in my book how when Coca-Cola bottling was growing, bottles would explode. And so he was the first scientist to really discover how thin the glass could get and how many times you could wire scrub it before they would break. So he helped set standards all over the world for how to take care of glass. So he's an amazing guy. And of course, he developed American glass research in Butler, which took on the bad infamy of that's where the shooter was on top of that roof. So this, again, taking something so wonderful, American glass research was designed to protect and provide safety, right? And I just want to flip that back around and say, this is not what AGR or Butler is all about with that shooting. Okay, my last picture in this book, Cummings Coffee and Candy. Has anyone been in that? Yeah. They have 4 locations now. The one on Main Street was actually started in 1905, closer to the courthouse, and then it was moved down where it is now. They've got one at the hospital, one down Route 8, and one right near my house on 68. So that was featured in my book. I wanted to put in places that are still there now, focus on those places. Of course, some places that I talk about, like the old Nixon Hotel is gone down the Diamond, but I wanted to use Cummings because it's still there. Okay. Any questions so far? And am I talking at a good pace? My husband says that I talk too fast, so. I wanted to write in 2 timelines. So writing what I know meant that I was set in 2022 is where the book started. but I did some flashbacks to 1904 up to 1929. And that allowed me to highlight things that are still here now, as well as give the history with this fictional narrative. I mentioned that I don't like to read history books. Does anyone here like to read history books? That's great. For me, I like history incorporated into a book. But I think of historical fiction as generally you set something in a timeline and that's where it is. In my book, I'm making up my own terminology. I'm calling it roots fiction. So as my characters are doing something, I kind of take a little root out to the background of that something. When I was in college, I was an English major, and we read a book that had this crazy character fictionally traveling all over the Southeast. And at one point, he went to Stone Mountain, Georgia. And Stone Mountain is this giant mass of granite with a carving from the Civil War on the side. And I could see it in my mind. But I lived in Virginia. But wouldn't you know, years later, I met my husband. We were in Atlanta, and he lived in Stone Mountain, Georgia. And the first day he took me on to Stone Mountain, Georgia, I was like, I could tell you all the history of Stone Mountain, Georgia. Way more history than I ever remembered from high school or college history, because of this fictional book and the little bit of narrative I learned about Stone Mountain, Georgia, and stuck in my head. So that's what I tried to do here, is to create some historical tangents that might stick in people's heads. And one of my procedures is I will often read 15 to 20 pages of a book or an internet story and try to narrow it down to 1 or 2 paragraphs. Just a nugget, something strong and memorable that hopefully will stick with people. I have several themes in my book. Let me go back here. Okay, 1, 2. So the first theme has to do with the heart. Now, I don't know how most authors do it, but I didn't sit up to write a book and say, I'm going to have a theme about the heart. But when I looked back, I saw that my main character, this narcissist named Adam, was very, very cold-hearted. And as I searched the scriptures, if it talks about, when Pharaoh, God hardened his heart in scripture, and how I think there is something we don't understand, that when someone has consistently rejected the grace of God, their heart can become almost impenetrably hard. So that's what Adam does. In the beginning of the book, he says, I'm not going to thank or blame God for anything. And as he moves into a life where it starts with one crime and gets further and further, his heart gets so hardened. So that's back in 1904. His first crime takes place around 1907 at the Pullman building. And then his heart, throughout the story, you see him getting harder and harder. And I named him Adam the Zatko. Now, I hope I never run into anyone whose last name is Zatko. I just picked the name out of error, but I'm sure someone on Benny has Zatko, but I wanted a name that started with A and ended with, and was A to Z. Because all of humankind, we've all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And I wanted him to represent, what could happen to a heart that just rejects God forever. So Adam represents fallen mankind. In the modern family, we have 4, or really 5 generations later, this family called the Varga family. And the story is really about how they are connected to Adam, but it's generations later. And the main character in the modern family is named Caroline Varga. She's 10 years old, and she has a heart condition. This was also autobiographical because I have had something since college called tachycardia or arrhythmia. I don't know if anyone here has had that, but your heart just suddenly starts to speed up. And when I was younger, I thought I was going to die. As I got older, I realized I could just kind of clench my teeth and it would kind of go away. But it's something with the valve there that trips up. And the worst case I had was when my son Anthony was a baby, and it lasted like 10 minutes. But usually it lasts 1 to 5 minutes. Not a big deal, not concerning. So in the book, my Caroline has this heart condition. Her heart valve is too open. And throughout the story, that kind of plays into why she is able to have this connection to her great-great-grandfather and see some things from the past. So she's my vehicle to reach into the past. So she is open-hearted. I also have a theme about generational curses. And let me see if I have the scripture here. Yeah, this is it comes up 3 times in the Bible, this really interesting quote. It says, this is Deuteronomy 5, 9-10. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. This is in the context of the 10 commandments. So the second commandment is about idols. You shall not bow down to the idols or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am the jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. So my job is a worship leader. I lead worship in Mars. I've been doing that for 12 years. And I study the scripture quite a lot. But this always kind of tripped me up. It was like, some translations actually say, God says, I will punish the children. Like, why would God punish the children for something their father did? I like this version better because it says, visit the iniquities. So I started to ponder, what does that mean? And what is this 3rd and 4th generation? And why would it take so many generations? Now, a lot of people focus on this, but look at this. It says 1,000 generations will be blessed. So if you choose, like I've chosen to put my faith in God, there's a blessing that spills out. I think a big part of the blessing and the curse is the prayer that if you are a parent who's rejected God completely, your children don't have that lovely umbrella of prayer covering them. But if you have chosen to believe in God, you're praying, and I think the prayers last. Even long after you're gone, what you pray today for your kids and grandkids, I think stays there, that God hears it, and He's faithful to answer those prayers. So I was meditating on this, and I thought, let's write a story about this 5th generation. And that's where I got my timeline. So the Varga family moves in, and I backed it up to their great-great-grandfather, who was 5 generations before. And that sort of became the vehicle for my book. It's really interesting scripture to spend time thinking about. My 3rd theme is about redemption. So redemption is one of my favorite words, and these are just a few definitions. To atone or make amends for past evil or error, and to regain possession of something by paying a debt. So in the book, I mentioned the Pullman, that the way it closed down in 1982, I wasn't here, but I think no one thought it would be empty for so long. Overnight, I forget if it was 20,000 jobs, millions of dollars in the economy of Butler just gone overnight when they closed down. I'm not saying that was evil, but it was really a shame for Butler and what happened to the town after that. So the Pullman building is part of the redemption story. The Pullman building was founded by a guy named Diamond Jim Brady and John Hanson. Now, John Hanson grew up in Pennsylvania, was a wealthy entrepreneur. Diamond Jim Brady was a New Yorker, and he was actually known for carrying diamonds on a little belt around his waist and diamonds all over his fingers. And he also never had any children. So Diamond Jim Brady is in Butler, really, develops the Pullman, really, walks around with diamonds, really. Of course, I had to make someone rob him. So that's where the storyline starts, with Adam interacting with Diamond Jim Brady. But those diamonds that get stolen are also something that can become an idol, right? Wealth is probably the primary thing that people start to worship in this world. And so Adam gets very sucked into these diamonds he's stolen, and it begins to corrupt him because he essentially puts them above friend, family, God, everything else. So the diamonds become a redemption part of the story. Butler itself becomes a redemption part of the story. And then the Varga family and their legacy are a redemption part of the story. Now, I put up their greatest story ever told because, of course, the Bible is the greatest redemption story ever, and every one of us get to participate in it because there were past evils, and there was something that was a debt that needed to be paid, and Christ came and paid it for us. So we celebrate that at Easter, and for me, every day. My book also has to do with choosing life and hope. Of course, there won't be future generations if someone decides not to have a baby. So those generations came on, and the choice to have life brings hope for the future. Just a little more on my slides, and then I'll take some questions. What's next for me is I'm trying to work with Butler Tourism, and I made a series of videos that are me introducing Preston Park or me introducing Lake Arthur, and just 1-minute videos that I hope will bring people to want to come visit those places. I want to write a movie script. That might happen. I'm working on the second book, which I'm going to call Silent Defenders. Does anyone know where that name came from? It'd have to be a Butler person. If you're down at the Diamond in Butler, which is where the courthouse is, there's a big Civil War statue with a man that just represents a generic soldier on top. And the statue is called Our Silent Defenders. So it's that was what inspired the title. I'm working on 2 children's books about Lake Arthur. So let me show you. There's a chapter in my book, I think it's 7 or 8, where when you look at Lake Arthur on a map, it looks like a little character. It looks like a little creature. And I'll pass some of these around so you can see. So the blue parts on here are exactly what the lake looks like. The green parts are just to kind of fill him in and make him look more like a character. So if you want to pass these around, here, I'll set them there. There you go. Anybody want to see these? So I created this character. I call him Maury. And I've written a book that's hopefully going to come out this summer where Maury is a lake creature, and he's talking about the history of Lake Arthur. And in the second book, Maury is a lake creature who can magically come out of the water at night and go help people that like have a drought or problems. So that is my Maury character book. That's coming along. There he is. This is just places to find me. Yeah. So what did I not tell you about? I think that was mostly it. I didn't want to give away the whole storyline of the book, but if you would like, I'd be glad to read a little bit of it or answer questions. So I'm not sure what people would prefer. Does anyone have any questions for me? Yes, sir.
You know Lisa Nicholas.
Do I what?
You know Lisa Nicholas?
I don't. Who's that?
She's in the prominent family in Butler, but she was on the school board.
Okay.
She maybe is off over cat.
Yeah, she's not on it right now. It's funny how God works. So I used to be a teacher, and when I thought about going back to teaching during COVID, I thought, no, I've been teaching homeschooling for 15 years. Not sure if I want to go back full time. So I said to my husband, what if I just put my name out for the school board? Now, Jennifer Cummings from Cummings Coffee is on the school board, and she actually, not knowing much about me, the first time I met her, she said, you should go out for the school board 8 years ago. So I prayerfully put my name out there, and they do a random draw. So my name appeared first on the ballot, which meant all the people that just picked the top 4 picked me. And that was in May 2 years ago. And then we had 2 school board members that had to step out in June. And so they asked me to step in June. And that's when I realized God wanted me on the school board, because the Butler School District had a difficult and destructive policy about homeschoolers. And the policy didn't come up in November, it came up in August. So I got in June, and in August I said, as a homeschooler, can we talk about this policy? And we were able to make that a much more positive policy for Butler. So ever since then, I've just been learning and serving. But again, I hadn't even started this book. I didn't know I was going to write a book in May. I start writing the book in July, and it's just so neat because I feel like when I talk about the book to people now, they know that I'm invested in Butler. I'm not trying to make money writing a book. I want to help Butler. I'm serving in Butler. I care about Butler. So God knew that it would lend some credibility, I think, too, that I was committed to our school district. And I didn't realize we have a wonderful superintendent in Butler, and some really fantastic people. So it's been a joy to work with them. But I should meet this person. Yeah, I'll have you write her name down, Wally. Any other questions or thoughts? Maybe you know some history that I should know. Yeah.
Well, another thing you probably know this with the theater, talked about tearing it down for a long time. And I think they almost issued a demolition permit until this French
Yeah.
showed up.
Yeah.
How well do you know him?
He's been at my house and we've conversed a few times. So I wouldn't say we're friends, but we know each other.
I know a Ron French, but does he have a brother?
He does have a brother. They both, I understand, he and a brother moved to Houston together, but they went to high school here. So they grew up here.
But Ron worked at Armco.
Okay.
Might be a good check.
Maybe. Yeah. In my book, I also feature Playthings, Etc., which is the fun toy store up near Slippery Rock. And it's shaped like a stealth bomber. And ironically, it turns out that Nadine Shackleton was Nadine Freyer or something. And she and Brian were always put next to each other all their childhood because their names started with FR. That was kind of funny that I realized they knew each other from childhood. You know, Brian Frenchette cares about Butler. He's lived in Houston for probably 30 or 40 years. Apparently in Houston, he opened a place called the Butler Inn, and it's like a restaurant that is all decorated in Butler things. And he loves to tell these Houston people, oil is not from Houston, oil is from Butler. So yeah, he's a Butlerite at heart. And I think they come here for several months a year now. Yeah.
Butler lost the Mid-Tilly's South, the Lindor Hotel, which is a restaurant, the hot dog shop, which was the most famous place, Butler, gone. That the theater could really help Main Street.
Yeah.
Bring in restaurants.
Yeah. So we need new restaurants because we also lost the Brick House recently. Someone just bought the Lindor Hotel. It just was in the paper on the 23rd of May. As I understand, they're going to invest and fix it up and sublease it, but I don't know what it's going to be. Yeah. I don't have the capital or the bandwidth or the money to go fixing old buildings. I just want them to get fixed. So, I didn't tell you the story. So the Pullman building, I toured it in 2014, and then I start working on this book, and I found out that my brother-in-law had the phone number of the owner because my brother-in-law does corncob blasting of log homes. And at one point, the owner had hired him to come and blast some of the inside to put the new staircase in or something. So my brother-in-law gives me this phone number. And once again, I just call him. I said, you don't know me, but this is who I am. And he agreed to meet with me. Well, at the same time, I was getting to know through the school board a man named Mark Gordon. And I always forget his title. But Mark Gordon used to be the president of Armco, and he has a title within Butler now that's supervisor of new development or something. He knows so much, brilliant man, but he'd never set foot inside the Pullman building. So because of this little book, Mark and I go to meet Sumner in the Pullman building, and these two men get to meet. And Sumner, the owner, turns to Mark and I and says, what do you think I should do with this building? And I just wanted to say, this is so funny. I don't know what's all going to come of it, but to have the privilege of seeing these men connect and to be the reason that they were meeting, to know that this could formulate what will happen. Well, both Mark and I said, please do not subdivide the top floor. The Pullman building, let me go back to that picture. I can put back here somewhere. Oh, there it is. So the Pullman building, up here is kind of domed, and all of these windows on three sides are just beautiful. It's full of light, big ceilings. They're two separate wings that are connected in the middle, and we said this should be some kind of fancy restaurant or maybe a big venue for weddings or something. Please don't chop that up. And hopefully he won't. But the rest of it, his plan then was to make 9 really nice luxury condos in there that people could rent or buy, I guess. And they're just full of these giant windows. In fact, as he's owned the building for 15 years, vandals keep breaking the windows. And I don't know how much money he's lost in that, but finally I think he has good surveillance and it will get completed. So the Pullman building, if that comes back to life and the public can go in it and enjoy that, I will feel like I did something for the redemption of Butler. And of course, in this second book, as I'm walking through that, my husband and I went on a cruise. We did other things. And when I say Butler, Pennsylvania, you can kind of tell who's got their nose in the news by the people that go, oh, Butler. In the past, we'd always say Pittsburgh, right? We're from Pittsburgh, because no one had heard of Butler. And now, a handful of people will say, oh, Butler. And then we can have a conversation about that and how it affected this community. Yes, ma'am.
What about the Jeep?
Yeah. The Jeep? The history? Do you know some stuff about the Jeep?
Oh, yeah. And it's connected about.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of research about the Jeep, and I found out the names of some of the real people who developed it. But the American Austin Company was in Butler. Austin was from England, so the Austin car was very popular. And then the American Austin developed. And when it went bankrupt in 1932, I think, this American Austin dealer from Florida said, no, this was a great car. We need to keep the car. So Roy Davis moves to Butler from Florida, and he buys out the assets to the Austin car, or the Austin car, and he renames it the American Bantam. Now, I think that's such a funny name. Do you know what Bantam means?
Little.
It means little, but it's usually used for kind of chicken, right? Like the Bantam chickens. And they're known to be sort of feisty and small, and they don't give up. And apparently there was a time where people would call feisty small women Bantams too. I don't know. But anyway, he named it an American Bantam. And part of that was so he wouldn't have to pay any royalties to the old name. And he got a good deal on buying the assets. I think it was like 1/700th of the value or something he got it for. And they developed this team, and they're making their Bantams and, kind of living hand to mouth, not making a big profit, when the government issued the need for this reconnaissance car for World War II. So we had like a Lend-Lease program. You weren't going over to the war in Europe in the World War II, but we were creating things like planes and cars to send over. And so the government said, we want all of these specifications. It can't be more than 1,800 pounds. It can't be bigger than this. It has to have all of these features, and we need it within 7 weeks. And out of like 325 car manufacturers at the time in America, only 3 of them even tried. Only Bantam actually did it in time without changing the timeline. They got it there. It got there within a few hours to spare of the deadline in Maryland. And when they tested it, it went beyond what they wanted. So it was pretty incredible. And this is my redemption story with the second book, really, is I feel like there's still a part of what happened after that, but it's just a shame. Because what happened after that is that Bantam here started to make them. The government knew they needed more than we can make, so they asked Willys Overland in Ohio and Ford in Michigan to make 1,200 each. And then apparently in Europe, if a car broke down, there was 3 different manufacturers, and it was not a good idea because they couldn't get the parts they needed because there was 3 different manufacturers. So they gave all of it to Willys Overland because they felt Butler couldn't handle it. And maybe we couldn't. They did say apparently at the time, look, you're not competitors. We need to work together for the military cause. That makes sense. But then when the government itself took the patents and they said, oh, Butler, you can make some trailers, and then Bantam ended up shutting down and pretty much got nothing, I think that's sad. So I would love to see something come back that brings not just a Jeep festival, but maybe something that would be a production of another car or something to Butler at some point to kind of reclaim what was lost there. So we'll see. I know that Trump knows a guy that makes cars, right? And my husband and I are not beyond. We actually did send a tweet out to Elon Musk and said, hey, we have a car company idea you could bring to Butler. Come on. I actually did when he was alive. I sent a note to Frederick Koch, who owns the biggest home in Butler. And Frederick Koch is one of the rich Koch brothers, a billionaire. And my letter to him said, could you just please dump $1 million or $2 million in our theater here and help us get our theater back? But he didn't write back to me. But his home, which is called Elm Court, have y'all heard of Elm Court in Butler? You have? It's kind of secret. I mean, you can't see it from the road. I only really know about it because of something called Google Earth, where you can look from above and spy on things and see the Earth from above. And also because one of my friends is a caterer there. She'll go in and help cater fancy meals there. But Elmport is no longer used for anything other than special events because Frederick Koch died. But it is considered like one of the most beautiful homes in America as a Tudor manse, it's called. And Frederick Koch had a collection of like 30 homes all around the world in Switzerland and all these places. And when you look online, it would say his Swiss chalet, his Hawaiian this, and his Butler manse. Butler. So it sits kind of between downtown Butler and the mall area off to the right. And there's a fancy like marble gate going up, but you can't see it. So I actually worked that into my next story as well. The other thing about my next story is that when Trump was shot, I started asking about George Washington. I said, wasn't George Washington shot in Butler too? And do you guys know about this connection, this story? You know about the Washington Trail, right? In 1753, George Washington traveled from Virginia to go all the way up to Erie to tell the French, get out. He was really young. He was only 21. And he knew, of course, that the French would say no. But diplomacy meant that you had to have this formal, get out or else. And that he took the letter from the French back from Fort Le Boeuf, and he was heading back to Virginia so that essentially the war could start. Because he knew that when he brought the letter, Governor Dinwiddie would then start the war that would turn into the French and Indian War. But as he is coming back through right here, he has a Native American guide at one point who turned and shot at George Washington. They think it happened somewhere right off, like near Evans City, but closer to Butler, which puts it basically 4 to 11 miles from where Trump was shot. So it's kind of profound to think of what our country would be like if Washington had been killed. If he had been killed, he wouldn't have been our first president, but we might all be speaking French right now. He might not have gotten the warning back in time. The French might have mustered. Like, who knows? We don't know. But it's interesting to imagine how impactful that one thing could have been if the gun had not missed. So I put that into this new book because we're all living in a time where we, good or bad, pro-Trump or not pro-Trump, we don't know what life would have been like, right, if he had been shot. And so it's just kind of an interesting thing to think 250 years from now, what people might say of this point in history, of what if that bullet hadn't missed him. So I did incorporate that, but I had a little fun with it because I'm taking this musket. No one knows what happened to the musket, but I'm putting the musket as if it still exists in my story. So that's been kind of fun. Yes, so does that answer your question about the Jeep?
Thank you.
Does anyone want to add to that? You might know lots of Jeep trivia. I told my husband I really want to own a Jeep, but do you know what? The Consumer Reports ranks it not so good. It's an expensive car to own. So he said, my husband's way too practical. We don't own a Jeep yet. But then I said, why don't we get an old Bantam and fix it up? That would be fun. I'd love to do that. So while I mentioned my husband was born and raised in Cabot, in the Starver area, if you're familiar, near Saxonburg. And so in the new book, I also talk about James Roebling and so many funny things out of that. James Roebling had a grandson or great-grandson who invented an amphibious trapped vehicle, and he gave the patent to the U.S. government at the same time the Butler Jeep was being invented. He wanted it to be used. He invented it to rescue people from hurricanes and floods. He didn't want a military vehicle, but the government came to him and said, we need this. So it was called the Amtrak or the LCV or something like that. But that also became used overseas during the war for the war effort. And it was invented by the grandson of James Roebling. So another Butler connection. But my husband grew up here, and he left Butler to go to college in Wisconsin and then Minnesota, and then ended up deciding it was too cold. And he just decided to move to Atlanta, which is where I met him. Neither one of us really liked Atlanta. So we got together and said, let's get out of Atlanta. But it was ironic because he didn't know he was going to come back. And I always tell people now, the thing about Butler is the men leave and they go find a wife and they bring her back to Butler. And I've probably met 30 people that said, yeah, they do. These men go out and they find a wife and bring her back to Butler. So a lot of people come back here. I grew up, like I said, with immigrant family in Virginia, and all of those cities where I lived, even though they were pretty, the roots did not go very deep among my peer group, meaning everyone came from somewhere else. Atlanta's kind of a melting pot. Nashville is too. Savannah, not so much. But until I moved to Butler and bought that old house, I never felt like I was home. I never felt like I was home anywhere. My parents always said, maybe we'll go back to Norway. College was transient. Everywhere else I lived, I knew it was temporary. And the minute we set foot in this old house, I was like, I'm home. And it was a profound feeling to realize how people, their roots go very deep in Butler. They love family. They connect with family. I don't have any family in the country other than my small family. So to be in a town where people were just so connected to one another and their family ties and loyal to one another, it was pretty profound. It took a while to feel like I could be part of the community, but I really, truly love Butler now. And I always used to say when we retired, we would go live near some lake somewhere. And then it dawned on me that we lived right near Lake Arthur. I live near a lake. I can get to Lake Arthur in 15 minutes. So I decided I'm already in my retirement home and I'm just going to stay there. So we love Butler. Oh, can I keep talking? I'm talking pretty fast, aren't I? But another 5 minutes. You've been in Preston Park, right?
I have not.
Oh, you have?
I know where it is. I've never been.
Okay. Has anyone else been in Preston Park before? So in Preston Park, there's a little bridge. It's just a skinny one-lane bridge. And when I discovered it, it was because my brand new dog wouldn't cross it. She was too scared to cross this bridge. We had to teach her. But there's no sign on the bridge. And a couple years ago, they came out with a brochure that said this is called Perkins Bridge. So my mind was like, who is Perkins? And I looked it up, and it was a man named Hayes Perkins. Let me know if anyone heard of Hayes Perkins. Okay. So Hayes Perkins lived in Butler from 1936 to 1938. Why? This man was raised in Colorado. He traveled around the world like 9 times in the 1920s. He was the most wanderlust person you'll ever hear about. And he wrote a 2,000-page travel diary about all of his experiences. It says diamond mining in the Congo and, paddling down the river in this place in Africa and in Europe and in South America. He was everywhere. But back in the 20s, he met Frank Preston on a boat from the Cape in Africa going over, I think, to Australia. They met on a boat, these two men, and just hit it off. And so Frank Preston said, look, if you ever want to come to Butler, come to Butler. And Perkins traveled through Butler at some point, so I have him in my book as traveling through Butler, and guess what? He never had any kids. So he's in my book. And when he travels through Butler, he meets my characters. But then he comes back to Butler in the 30s, and he works for Frank Preston. But what's extraordinary about that, so first of all, Perkins, in his travels, he learned to do many things, but one was gardening. Like he learned about plants from all over the world and became, I think he was nominated by Preston to be in like the Society for Botanists or something in England. So he knew a lot about flowers. So Preston had him come in and develop the gardens around Preston Park. Before he came here, he worked for, what is his name? Hearst, William Randolph Hearst in California. Now, when I was 13, my parents took me to California. We went to tour the mansion of William Randolph Hearst. And it's like a gold palace. Everything is gold and unbelievably fancy and rich. And he had a whole zoo on his property, and he had swimming pools. And so this man leaves that and goes and lives in this little apartment right here. It's a 1-bedroom apartment with no toilet or something. It's just tiny. And he lives there for 2 years. Just mind-blowing. But what's unique is that Preston said, we need to type up your journals. This is valuable. So Preston hired, I think, someone in the Butler Eagle to type up the journals and made 3 or 4 copies. And after that, only like 20 more copies were ever made. And I have tracked down someone who has a copy. There's a man in Colorado who has spent 30 years writing a biography about Hayes Perkins and never published it. And I'm over here saying, John, it's time to publish your book. And I'm also trying to find that copy that I can scan because I want to read this diary. Like all that there is online is John put a list of the chapter titles, but there's nothing anyone can really read. So I'm hoping people will kind of have a renaissance of who this guy Hayes Perkins was. So I kind of romanticized him in my book. Has anyone ever seen the California cliffs where there's just like this mass of pink and purple flowers in California? And it was a mural that was actually at Union Station in New York at one time. It was on the cover of Time magazine. Back in the 50s, it was a photo opportunity place. Has anyone seen that?
Plants are there, the ice plants.
Yes, yes. Those were planted by Hayes Perkins.
So it's a succulent.
He learned about that in Africa. He tore out all of this poison oak and spent like 16 years planting that beautiful thing. And so the same Hayes Perkins that was in Butler created that beautiful thing. And I decided, maybe it was a way of outpouring some unrequited love that he made that. So that was my fictional take on it. But he plays into my book too. And he's just a fascinating character that he would choose to spend 2 years in Butler. But I'm ending this with, why not? Because Butler, the world is a beautiful place. I've seen some of it, not a very big percent, but there's no place like home. And I think before we go out and try to find the beautiful things in other places, it's important to appreciate the things we have close to home, right? So my book, if anyone wants to read it, I can leave some here. They are only available online right now, but they're also at the Little Green Bookstore on your street here. So the Little Green Bookstore at the other end of Cecelia is carrying 5 or 6 copies there. Also, if you like music, I'm going to be singing at the Thursday nights, June 12th. I'll be singing down in the side near the bank, I guess, on the other side of town. So June 12th from like 5 to 7, I'll be singing all kinds of songs from the 50s to the 90s-ish. Yeah. Well, thank you for letting me be here today, and I'll stick around and answer any other questions. I appreciate you. Thank you.